that out. I'll introduce myself a little. Thank you. I was, at the risk of not making it out of here live or losing people online, I'm an Ohio guy, born and raised, went to Ohio State, which down here doesn't play all that well, but we moved down here 13 years ago. My wife and I, we have 3 daughters.
None of them went to Ohio State.
Well, I'm going to tell you how crazy our family is. And if you ever want to come over for a college football Saturday, you might want to come to our house because it's interesting. So our oldest daughter graduated from the University of Florida. Our middle daughter is a sophomore at UGA. And our youngest daughter that's graduating this spring has decided she's going to Alabama.
Yeah, we're talking.
So, roll tide. And so the Ohio State guy is like filling the SEC with his
We
shoulders.
say you weren't born in the South, but you got here as quickly as you could.
I did. In the Midwest, you're not allowed to move. At least that's what they tell you. They kind of hold you prisoner. And then once you figure out you're actually allowed to leave, you do. So anyway, happy. I mean, we best decision my wife and I ever made was moving to Georgia. So it's home. It's home to our girls, and we're happy to be here. But interestingly enough, in all my years here, this is my first time here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'd actually never been to Americus and never been.
We had
to
the Thalls here last year. They both came.
That's right. That's right. You did. So, all right. So I have I have several goals for what we're doing, and I assume they can hear me online okay and everything. All right. Primary goal number 1 is to not bore you to death. I know you're here voluntarily or to earn some extra credit or whatever. So I hope we have a little bit of fun. By the way, if you have questions or you want me to reiterate something, you guys certainly being here makes it easier. But online, I think we'll be monitoring the chat and stuff. So feel free to put something in there or even talk. I assume you can unmute yourself and just chat back. So it could be a conversation, but I got a lot to cover. I don't know how long. What time did you tell them we could go till? I don't want to keep them longer than you.
As long as you won't go.
All right, so like 5 o'clock.
That's right. That's good.
All right. We'll get it done over the lunch hour. There's a lot to cover, but I'm hoping that you get some information from this that you walk away with, maybe helping yourself decide what you want to do, the things that you need to work on to better yourself, get ready for the job market, those types of things. So, all right, let's burn through some of this. It is not advancing now. So I work for the Georgia Society of CPAs. We are the professional association that represents certified public accountants in Georgia. We have about 12,000 members. There are 22,000 licensed CPAs in the state of Georgia. 4,000 of them are domiciled somewhere else. About 18,000 of them actually live in Georgia. You do not have to be a member of the association. It's volunteer. It's the State Board of Accountancy, and we'll get to that actually. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. That was working. Yep. Is hold your license if you're going to be a CPA, and we'll get to some of that. But here are just a few things that we do. Obviously, we're a membership organization, so membership activities and networking, connectivity among CPAs in the state is really mission 1. We do a lot of community support things. We'll talk about that, continuing professional education, public relations, regulations, regulation type stuff. We do some quasi-regulatory work on behalf of the state. If you are in a CPA firm and you're doing a test work, you have to have what's called a peer review done every 3 years. And we actually conduct and administer that work on behalf of the state. Probably the most important thing we do that's the hardest to articulate and sell is our legislative work, both in the state of Washington or in the state of Georgia and in Washington, D.C. And we will hit on a few of those things in a little bit. Here's just a little of the history. We've been around for well over 100 years. We had our 100-year anniversary. They celebrated in 1908. We were actually founded in 1905, incorporated in 1908. And I am the 3rd executive director. That's now CEO, but of the organization in the last, I guess 60 years now. So deep roots, great tradition, been around a long time. All right. I'm gonna ask questions and the four of them in here in class are at a disadvantage because I'm gonna stare at them. If you are not a student member of the Georgia Society of CPAs, it's usually a $25 one-time fee that makes you a student member all through school and 1 year after graduation. However, today, if you email Callie Hammond at that address, you can get a free student membership. So, and it, again, will cover you all through school and 1 year after school. No reason not to. You'll get a lot of information about the exam, different things that are coming up. It'll help particularly locally. If you want to connect to any of our chapters and go to meetings and meet people, you can network. A great way to try and look for jobs or find people that you might, just like being around, and if you want to work for them or not. Things like that. So, again, C. Hammond at gscpa.org. All right, foundation. Dr. Smith mentioned that. We give out scholarships every year. We have about $3.2 million in endowment funds that allow us to spend money on scholarships. And it all depends, how much we give depends on pretty much how much individual members give in a given year, but then how well the markets do. So some years this has been as high as 200,000, and some years it's been a little lower than this, but you can see 90 students this year from 13 Georgia universities. This year, applicants were phenomenal across the board. So there were some scholarships that might have originally been a $5,000 scholarship that got split into 2 or 3. So the dollar is a little less per, but to more students across 13 universities. The applications for that open in the fall to New Year timeframe, and then they're awarded. Our scholarship committee met just a month ago. So if you didn't apply, it's really easy to do. You can do it online, and next year I encourage you to go ahead and apply. It's not a
I think it was
It's not a
last year,
heavy
we had
lift.
3 or 4 that got scholarships here. So we had 3 or 4 last year.
fantastic. I love that. I love that. All right. At some point in your career, probably several points in your career, maybe even while you're in school, you're going to be like, hey, I got an idea and I want to do something. I want to do this thing. And you're going to go to whoever can say yes or no to that, whether it's a boss, a spouse, somebody at church, somebody at school, whatever it might be. And they're going to say no to you. And what I encourage you to do is figure out why they're saying no and have open and honest conversations about it. Because this, the Georgia Accounting Food Fight, is, in my 26 years of doing this work, is the thing I am singularly most proud of the profession doing and being a part of. And I said no to doing it twice. So the people that worked for me that had this great idea, there was conversation about some things I didn't like and whatnot, and back and forth, but they kept asking, they kept at it. And eventually, not only did they prove me wrong, I mean, they proved me wrong in the biggest way you possibly could, which I love. The Accounting Food Fight pits, it could be firms against firms. So if you're an accounting firm, you can do it. If you work for Chick-fil-A, they could certainly pull and have a group of people in their finance and accounting team. We've had groups of students pull together at a university and be a team, if you will, and it pits all these different groups of people against each other to raise money for the Georgia Regional Food Banks, which means if you raise money here as a student group or as professors, the money stays locally in your region's food bank. And this is how wrong I was. In 2023, we raised enough money to provide 1.4 million meals. Since 2014, so in the 10 years of it, we've raised nearly $2.2 million, which is the equivalent of nearly 9 million meals in the state of Georgia. In our highest year, we had 8,000 of our members participate and contribute to the food fight. And there are winners at the end. So like the Deloittes and PwCs of the world, if they participate, they compete against each other. Mid-tier firms, small firms, like I mentioned, industry, accounting and finance departments, universities, things like that. So we have a whole bunch of different categories of winners and whatnot. But this just shows the profession coming together and giving back and keeping money in your community. Because I am not, trust me, in my job, I drove down here from Atlanta, right? And some of you may want to stay here, some of you may want to go on somewhere else. But the reality is when you leave Atlanta, people make the assumption because you're Atlanta that that's all you care about. And so this is sort of echoes for us with that notion of the entire state matters and the work we do everywhere matters. And that's true of the CPA profession. All right. There's no question that the accounting profession for a very long time has been what they call a legacy profession. People enter it because they had an aunt and uncle, or a father or a mother, or somebody close to them that was in the profession. And that tends to perpetuate the same type of people. And when you start breaking down the demographics of it, the profession for a very, very long time has been dominated by Caucasians. And the reality is the profession for many decades has realized not only is there a responsibility to provide pathways, opportunity, welcomeness to a diverse group of a community of people, there's opportunity in it as well. One of the ways as the society that we like to try and create avenues and opportunities where there maybe aren't for people to see the profession as a pathway. We work with the Atlanta Public Schools for this program called Rising Professionals. Students have to actually fill out an application and an essay saying, hey, here's why I want to participate. They come to our office for a day and they spend the day meeting all kinds of people that work as CPAs in a wide variety of roles that look like them, that come from their backgrounds, that create comfort and familiarity, quite frankly. They also spend that day competing for scholarships. So this past year, I think we gave out $15,000 in scholarships to the 30 students that were there, and they compete by engaging and winning certain competitions with each other and groups and things like that. So we hope to take that program and replicate it in Augusta, Columbus, Macon, maybe here, wherever that we, might be able to have volunteers and people willing to contribute dollars to get that done. So that's something we're proud of, and it has been around for about 9 years now, close to 10 years. All right, I mentioned earlier the Georgia Society versus the Georgia State Board of Accountancy. If you become a CPA or online in the room, are you guys thinking CPA? Anybody? You guys? Yeah, maybe. Yeah. The Georgia State Board of Accountancy is the one that will actually give you your license. So you get your education, you pass the exam, you get your experience. That's the way you get licensed. The Georgia State Board of Accountancy is the one that regulates it. You renew licenses every 2 years and all kinds of other stuff, yada, 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 if you will. All right, let's get into some of the information that I hope you'll find a lot more interesting than what we've already talked about. So when we talk about trying to see the future, there are people that specialize, they call them futurists, and trying to understand trends and what's happening and how it might impact you or the community or the profession or anything, right? And we'll talk about hard trends and soft trends. The hard trends that are impacting the profession, hard trends are things that it's very difficult to do something about. They are what they are. Soft trends can ebb and flow with culture and personality and change and can be impacted or change much faster than hard trends. So the biggest hard trends affecting the profession are demographics, technology, and regulation. Here's where the demographics mean something to you guys. We had, during the 2000s and into the 2015 timeframe, even a little past that, we had record numbers of enrollments in accounting programs. We had record numbers of people taking and sitting for and passing the CPA exam. And during that time frame, we still could not replace one for one those that are leaving the profession, right? So there's more retiring or moving out than there are moving in. Well, birth rates will tell you over the last 30 and 40 years that the US population without immigration is going to decline. It takes about 2.14 live births per female to just sustain a population, okay? Well, our birth rates in the US are far below that. It's like 1.9 something when you average it across all sectors. And so, of course, there's a ton of people retiring. Of course, enrollments in universities and specifically accounting programs are down because there aren't as many people. 2025, that fall 2025 will be the smallest freshman class in colleges and universities across the country in like 30 years. And so that impacts it. Right now, within the profession, there is more work than there is people. And if we just sort of place that next to 2008, you guys were all much younger then and may not remember much of it, right? But we had a recession. And from 08 to whenever we came out of the recession, 11, 12, 13, whatever, however, wherever you look, a lot of people have a different opinion about that. There are also different measures on unemployment. But during that period of time, unemployment was about 15%, depending on the measure you looked at. The CPA, if you were a licensed CPA during that time frame, unemployment was less than 3%, which is considered full employment because there are going to be people that have babies, people that have parents that get sick and leave, for a while. They opt out with intention as opposed to being laid off. And so I just point that out because there is very real opportunity. And unlike any generation before you, you will be more in control of those opportunities than anybody else has been before. Employers they don't like it sometimes when I say this, but they're more beholden to you than in ways they haven't been before because there is more work than people. And we'll get into AI and some other technology stuff that'll wind up closing that gap. But those are things to think about if you're being a CPA. Okay, if you're going to sit for the exam, it's important to know that in Georgia, you can sit for the exam with 120 hours. You do not have to have that 5th year of school to sit and pass the exam. You need the 5th year of school to get licensed, but we're going to get into some details on that here in a little bit. The exam changed as of January of 2024. It used to be 4 parts. It is 4 specific parts. It is still 4 parts. You will have the 3 core parts, right? And then you have this for the 4th part, to sort of choose your own adventure. Now you can take it in any order you want. So it's not like you have to do the choose your own adventure at the end, but you can do tax compliance and planning or business analysis and reporting or information systems and controls, whatever speaks to you, whatever you might be better at, whatever, you think might be more employable. Here's the thing to know, that even if you do business analytics and reporting, that does not keep you from going and doing tax work or doing information work. So at the end, if you pass all 4 parts and you have experience, CPA equals CPA. It doesn't, what you choose on that choose your own adventure part does not restrict you from any area of practice, whether it's, the marketplace that's sort of granting into you or whether it's statute, like an audit and a test work is granted via statute, right? We're the only ones that can legally do that work. CPA is CPA at the end of it. Another important part of the exam, and there is some backstory to this. Before January of 2024, the window to take the exam was 18 months. And what that window means is once you pass the first part, you have 18 months to complete the other 3 parts and pass them before that first part you passed falls off and you have to retake it, right? Well, there was for several years a lot of discussion nationally about whether that window should be expanded or if it should stay the same. There are 2 things I want to point out in this. One, my personal position was there shouldn't be a window. COVID happened, which throws life at people. Again, family situations be incredibly complex. And there are just all kinds of different things that can happen. And if you pass the exam and show the competency, why are we arbitrarily resetting it at some point? The engineers, there are a lot of structural engineers and mechanical engineers and electrical engineers. They have a similar take in terms of their window is, I don't know if it's infinite, but it's much broader. The Georgia Society of CPAs, our official position was 36 months. There were a lot of people, and by people I mean in positions of power with state boards of accountancy and other places that have influence and or determine what the window is, that thought 18 months, thought 24 months, thought 36 months. Long story short, there was this sort of national compromise to try and standardize it at 30 months. The Georgia State Board of Accountancy and the Georgia Society, we agreed with that. And the Georgia State Board of Accountancy passed a rule that as of January, it's a 30-month window in Georgia. Here's the thing to realize. If any of you come from other states, some states did not pass 30 months. Some passed 36, some passed 24, and some kept it at 18. It's a very small group of states that did that, but if you're going to move somewhere and sit for the exam, you're going to want to pay attention to what their window is because it may be different than here. Might be more advantageous, might be less advantageous. Any questions or comments about that? Anybody? I don't know if it'll pop up in the chat or anything.
We look at it. If y'all have questions at the end, we'll be able to see you. If you raise your hand, we can't see it right now because it won't allow us to, but at the end, we'll take any questions from anyone, okay?
All right. So I talked about that 5th year of school. There are a lot of conversations, some of them very functional, and some of them very dysfunctional, because there's a lot of disagreement about what we call the 150-hour requirement, whether you should require a 50 or to sit for it or to be licensed. Clearly, in Georgia, you can sit for it at 120 hours. And the hurdles that creates financially, time-wise, and everything else. There is disagreement, there is not consensus among the profession around the nation about whether the 150-hour requirement should stay or go away, whether it's working or not working. Opinions are all over the place, and I certainly have my opinion. But there are groups like the AICPA and other state societies that are working on programs to try and create other avenues rather than just the traditional master's degree at a university, right? So the AICPA has an agreement, with Tulane University that you can seek the extra 30 hours virtually through Tulane for $150 a credit hour.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you can get it done online. You don't get a master's degree. It's just getting transcript credit, right? There are other programs, pilot programs that have been tried around the country. There was a experiential learning program in New Jersey, which is essentially go to work and get it all through internship and work hours through a university, through your employer. I don't know if that's certainly a model that everybody's looking to, but NASPA is the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. Okay, they're the national group that represents all the state boards that do the licensing and the regulation, right? And they put together a 10-person task force to come up with an alternative path to the 150-hour requirement that would do a few things. One, it would lower the cost to achieving something that is substantially equivalent to the 150 hours, meaning that you could either do 150 or do this, and licensing boards would consider them equivalent. So it would lower the cost. It would lower the burden of implementation, if you will. And it would be substantially equivalent to the 150 hours. So 10 people from around the country were appointed to that task force. We're doing some work. I'm actually the One State Society CEO that was appointed to this task force. We've been meeting for 6 months now. And essentially, this is just a concept, okay? And even if everything goes perfectly fine and all the different people that have to adopt it, and some state board, like in Georgia, says we're going to accept this pathway, we're easily 3 years from somebody entering into this pathway. But you see the top, which is sort of standard: get your bachelor's, get your master's, pass the exam, get your experience, you're a CPA. The one in the middle, bachelor's degree, you get, and then go get 30 hours randomly from other places. So you can get college transcript credit online through some pretty cheap sources. Not saying it's good education, but there are ways to do it outside of that traditional path up top. This other one that we're working on, which would be embedded in statute, and that would be the intention if we're successful, would be a bachelor's degree, what we call the structured professional program, and then the CPA exam and 1 year of experience. Now, this slide's a little old because what we're proposing right now is that structured professional program will actually take a couple of years, and it would include your 1 year of experience. So you're kind of double dipping, if you will. Here's what the structured professional program is. First of all, the cost would be free. You would do it with your employer, and you would have a CPA that is advising you through the program. But that CPA does not have to work in the business that you're working in. So if you want to go back and work for a family business or something, you can do that and still connect with a CPA that's outside of that business. You don't have to go into public accounting, and you don't have to be reporting directly to a CPA. But there would be this rubric of competencies that you, like if we used the AICPA's CPA exam competency framework, there's like 370 some of them. And so you would select whatever number of those competencies that you needed to fulfill it. And then you would document, okay, I'm doing this work, and document how you're learning or developing that competency, and a CPA would sign off on it. And you would complete that within 2 years, and then the state board you would submit it, and the state board would, in theory, sign off on it, and you could become licensed, assuming you'd pass the exam. So you're not paying for that 5th year school. You're doing it while you work, which is really important. Getting people to work is pretty important. So yeah, any questions about that before I bump on? Okay, and there might be some online we'll get to at the end. All right, the legislative stuff, I mentioned this earlier. So we have a fairly, I'll call it even powerful at this point, legislative arm. Our Vice President of Legislative Affairs is a guy named Tom Cook. He's been with us 20 years. He's been doing legislative affairs for the past 12. When I got here in 2011, we didn't have much of a presence at the State House or in Washington. So the very first thing we did was starting committing resources to our legislative program. Some of the things that we care about, I want to start baseline because every one of my friends doesn't get it. They think that I'm going down to the State House or going to Washington and trying to make taxes be a lot more complicated. Because, you represent CPAs, they do taxes. So the harder they are, the more complicated they are, the more work they get. It's actually quite the opposite. Our policy position on taxation is simplification. So everything that makes it simpler for the taxpayer is what we're in favor of. Now, you have a two-party system. There's some independence in there as well. And how they fund the government is where all the zaniness comes from, okay? And the fact that, Georgia is a purple state in national elections, but is a solid red state at the State House. There are a lot of different reasons for that. But that's what creates this complexity in all this stuff is that, quite honestly, particularly in Washington, the only way Congress has been able to lead or affect change and get legislation done for the last probably 30 years is through tax law. And so we can go up there and scream until we're blue in the face that simplify, 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 which we do. It's very hard because it's how they lead right now, because they don't lead through any other policy initiatives. And in Washington, by the way, they use the IRS as a weapon, and that's both parties. They'll both go, it's the other guy. Trust me, it's both parties. The IRS is chronically underfunded. You realize if you've ever filed a tax return, some of the systems they're using to process those returns were implemented when we were landing on the moon. That's how old these systems are. And so the IRS is in desperate need of funding. So we focus on that type of stuff as well. In Georgia, tax credits are a huge thing. We have an abundance of tax credits. Obviously, the one that is most famous or most well-known are our film tax credits. If you have family and friends from out of state, they probably may ask you occasionally, why are so many films and TV shows filmed in Georgia? Well, there's two primary reasons for that. One is you can come to Georgia, have your employees domiciled in one location, and you can film ocean scenes and beach scenes and swamp scenes and even some desert scenes and small town scenes and big city scenes and mountain scenes and snow scenes. Anything you need to film is in one state. What also drives them here are our film tax credits. It's really hard to study economically whether that pays off or not, the amount that the taxpayer spends on those things, but the profession has a lot to do with those. The profession actually certifies them now, finally, within the last 3 years. There's actually sort of like an audit done on them, when before it was just like free reign. You come in, produce a film, create a tax credit. And so I'm going to explain very briefly how those film tax credits work so that you understand. Let's say you decide you want to make a movie, okay? And you make that movie and you have this guideline that tells you, hey, if you employ X number of people in Georgia, you spend X number of dollars making that production, you can then put that all on this sheet, turn it into the Department of Revenue, and a percentage of that's turned into what they call a tax credit. Now, let's just make the numbers up. Let's say you spent $1 million on your film, and let's say it generated a 40% tax credit. So you have this $400,000 tax credit, which is literally like money to pay your tax bill. But you don't have a $400,000 tax bill, but she does. So you sell her that tax credit for $300,000. You put $300,000 in your pocket. She paid $300,000 to pay a $400,000 bill, and voila. That makes sense? Kind of genius, right? And people are making money on selling these and creating these. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made on them at the expense, obviously, of the taxpayer, because you go to work and you pay taxes, and your taxes are funding that tax credit. Doesn't make it wrong, just it becomes a lot of politics in whether we keep those things or don't keep those things. In this past year, 2023, the Georgia Senate had a study committee on all of our tax credits. There are some people that want to get rid of the film tax credits, and there's some people that want to get rid of other credits. An important tax credit down here is probably the rural hospital tax credit. you can get, I think it's maybe 100% tax credit for donations of a certain amount to develop, build, and maintain rural hospitals. Same thing with broadband in rural areas and things like that. And those are all vitally important because it gets services to where the free market might not go take it, right? So a lot of involvement with tax credits. I'm going to jump down to the Hope Zell bill. Some of you are on Hope and Zell, I imagine. And a while ago, a bunch of years ago, they actually tied up this loophole in it that was, let's say you graduate from high school and you have AP credits and you have dual enrollment credits. And so you wind up going to university and you get your bachelor's degree, but you do it at the university in less than 120 hours. You used to be able to take those left over hours and help pay for grad school. They plugged that loophole. Well, they've undone it now. So I don't know the effective date. I think it's probably going to be January 1st, 2025, but it could be January 1st, 2024. I'd have to look. And if you wonder, if you're wondering and you want specifics, you send me an email. It'll be at the end and I can chase down the answers. But essentially what they said was, listen, we're punishing kids that do AP credit and get college credit for it. Those that do dual enrollment and get college credit so that when they're coming into university, they have more credit. And we're basically telling them, well, too bad, so sad. Maybe you can finish earlier, but you don't get to use your whole scholarship. So they've undone that, and any of those credits you have left, you'll be able to then apply through Hope or Zell, whichever you're on, to more education or to a master's degree. Make sense? Throw questions in the chat if you have them, and we'll get to them. All right, CPA Day at the Gold Dome. We don't traditionally have a lot of students come. This year we had over 50 students show up. Yeah, from UGA, LaGrange, and.
I could do that as a field trip. I don't get to go either because I'm always teaching for that time.
Right.
But yeah.
So what they've kind of started doing is that we're going to make a field trip out of it. And it's going to be part of class.
That's a great idea.
And so we would love it if you guys bring students. But the next one is on January 30th, 2025. It's at the Freight Depot, which is right near the State House. The guy in the middle in the gray sport coat that's Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones. Hopefully, usually we get our picture taken with Governor Kemp. He was out of town when we did this one, and sometimes they're all out of town. But we gather, we hear from the Commissioner of the Department of Revenue. A lot of times we hear from the Chair of the Senate Finance Committee, Chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. So you get some of Georgia's power players in the room, and you hear from them. You can go shake hands, and plus there's a ton of CPAs in the room that you can meet and network and things like that. And it's free, and breakfast is actually really good. And I used to not say this because I didn't want to jinx it, but I've said it for a few years now. The bacon, if you like bacon, it's really, really good. The bacon is really, really good. It's almost worth the trip to the Freight Depot. But we give CPE credit for it. Maybe you guys could make it part of your curriculum or whatever. We would love to have you. It's free. You just got to get to Atlanta at like 7:30 in the morning on a Thursday. And I whispered that 7:30 in the morning on a Thursday. It starts at like 8, but it's a better time than it sounds, to be honest with you. So I'd love to see more students there. All right, these are just some of the other topics. Listen, for years as the profession, when it came particularly to legislative efforts and lobbying, if you will, most of our work's done in the protection of the public trust and public interest. And we have largely been able to avoid what we would call third rail or hot potato politics, right? These really controversial issues. And that's just becoming less and less likely for us. So an example in the past, Georgia passed what was commonly known as the heartbeat bill, right? It was an abortion bill, but it tethered to it the ability to get a child tax credit if you were pregnant at December 31st. Baby didn't even have to be born. Well, why do we care about that? Because it creates a ton of complications for the Department of Revenue, which when they get tied up, they can't then do their normal work. So as an example, a baby that's not born yet doesn't have a Social Security number. So these types of things can become rife with fraud. And the Department of Revenue didn't know how they were going to handle it, so they came to us for help in helping the legislature understand what was actually going to happen and how they might meet some of their goals with that, but it was likely going to be a lot of fraud through it. That is a third rail electric issue, if you will, when it comes to politics. And so we have to be very, very careful. Another on the business front is ESG, the environmental, social, and governance stuff. It's very, very popular in the rest of the world in terms of companies reporting on their sustainability, how they impact the environment, how they impact the world around them and their employees. And stateside, it's become a very political issue with Texas and Florida as an example, saying, hey, if you follow any ESG criteria, you cannot manage investments that are held by the state. Florida and Texas have done that. Georgia is considering it as well. Well, the profession does a lot of work in this space. And so it just creates political tension, and we have to walk a tightrope on these types of things. So more and more so than we ever have before. All right, just a few things about Georgia's future. Number one state to do business for the 10th year in a row. We're expected to add over 1 million jobs over the next 10 years, outpacing basically the Southeast and the US. We've a ton of investment in the state, right? Have any of you gone to Savannah recently? So giant car manufacturing facilities going up outside of Savannah, billions and billions of dollars. It is going to change the scope it's changing Savannah significantly. You still have old Savannah downtown and on the river and stuff, but living in and around Savannah is not going to be what it used to. Traffic is crazy. There are going to be neighborhoods and municipalities popping up all over the place because this is going to create thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs. They're going to need homes. They're going to need all kinds of stuff. But it's also going to raise the tax base there significantly. Lots of opportunity over in that area and around the rest of the state. We rank first in workforce training. We've got over 70 higher education and technical training institutions, which is a lot, and the quality of them is all, for the most part, off the charts. The number of accounting jobs is expected to grow by 16% by 2030, and that's going to outpace expected growth for the state. So we talked earlier about opportunity, particularly if you're CPA track, that portends for the future. I've already gone through some of the pipeline stuff. Remember, we've got more people retiring than coming in. We have fewer students coming into the pipeline for a lot of reasons, and that's not just us, that's every profession. All right, here are some skill sets that you need to think about. These are what employers are saying are the new ones or are increasing in terms of demand. And by the way, I can get you a PDF of this, so if anybody wants it. Strategic and critical thinking, communication and storytelling, leadership and sense making, business acumen, an agile mindset, and integration and collaboration. Okay, I'm going to point out business acumen. So some things that you know, knowledge you have, it's important. But it's only sort of mentioned on this list. And don't you like how there's 2 5s? It's because they're tied. The reality is what you know is not as important as your ability to see opportunities and problems, your ability to work in a cohort or a group of people to find ways to leverage those opportunities or solve those problems, and then, communicate those things. So are you good at working with other people? Are you good at storytelling? Storytelling is huge. So if those are things you struggle with, find ways to get comfortable, find ways to build that skill set. All right, their top issues: finding and retaining talent, go figure, maintaining culture and managing a hybrid workforce. The profession is hybrid, work in the office, work from anywhere, more than it's ever been, and that continues to grow. Need for new competencies in the team. So the ability to learn new things and upskill, right, will be important for you. And quite honestly, the pace of change with stuff like this is so rapid, and you guys are just used to it. Your ability to adopt and implement is going to give you a distinct advantage in the marketplace over particularly people that are older than you, even if they're more experienced. Acceleration of the digital transformation, I'll get to that in a little bit. Well-being of the team, so, and emerging trends, ESG, DEI, we've touched on those things, all very important and still top issues. This well-being of the team and company culture is something the profession struggled with for quite a long time, and in the last 20 years has made significant strides. And since COVID, it is light years different and better in terms of the recognition of how we live, how we work, and the things that happen and get in the way and demands and stuff like that. It's still it's still not an easy profession. It can pay very, very well. And you can do very, very well, but that ability, that focus on wellness is increasing more and more, and I'm glad to see it. I'm just going to highlight a couple of these again. You can see finding qualified staff, retaining qualified staff. These are public accounting firms, right? Challenges working with the IRS, and that all comes down to the funding issue we talked about earlier. There are other things as well. All right. So the World Economic Forum does a lot of economic studies. Some people consider the work they do controversial. Some consider it enlightening. Take your pick. It doesn't matter, but they do have some useful information. This is from 2020. They do a future of jobs report every 2 years, but the 2022 report, because of COVID and some other things, came combined with another one, and it was harder to kind of parse out what I want to show you. So this stuff is all still relevant. But when we talk about this, this is not just the accounting profession. This is every job in every sector all around the world, right? So everybody, everything. From the street sweeper in Mumbai to the ice cream maker in San Diego, this is everybody. So some things to pay attention to. The pace of technology adoption will remain unabated, so just continuing to grow. The skills gap going to be high, online learning and training on the rise. I mean, this is a great example. We've got the majority of people online, and it works. And it can
34
work
now.
very well.
34.
I love it. Thank you for being here. Even in economic downturns, the large majority of employers recognize the value of human capital investment. Unfortunately, you're going to start to see some news where that is not necessarily the case, because we've got large companies laying people off, right? Particularly in the technology sector. I think you're going to see more and more of that. There's going to be some slowdown. And honestly, I think, this is my personal opinion, most of that is coming from management just sort of hedging, because they don't know if we're heading towards a recession or not. And so they're just sort of getting out in front of it. And the technology sector is where it is hitting the most. All right, perceived skills and skill gaps. So where they say the increasing demand is in critical thinking and analysis, and then problem solving, self-management, working with people, all the things I said before, right? Very little, like what you know, important, but not terribly important. Your ability to work with people, your ability to synthesize, your ability to storytell on that, really, really big. I'm going to skip some of this in the interest of time. It's just top services and stuff. We talked about ESG. Just a quick look at public accounting, just to give you an idea. Deloitte is by far the largest firm in the world, and this is from 2023. I think they'll be in the mid-30s on the next one. So, and that's in billions. That's 28 billion annually in revenue. Is that 28? Yep. Largest firm in the country is Aprio. It's an Atlanta-based firm. They used to be a single office in Atlanta. They are now all over the country and all over the world, but they're a $317 million firm. They have grown like crazy. There's another Atlanta firm near the top 100. And there's actually more than these. I just picked out a couple to kind of show you there are opportunities that abound even in local single office firms where there's revenue that supports your growth, supports the different variety of businesses they do. Just as an example of the intrigue that can happen, Aprio, right? And this was before they cracked the top 50 in the world. They have for a long time done business in Russia and Ukraine. And when the Ukraine war, when Russia attacked Ukraine, and then suddenly we had an embargo on business there, they had assets on the ground in both countries. They had clients on the ground in both countries. And you have to deal with that stuff. It creates, this is the stuff TV shows are made of and movies are made of. And they were in it. Now everybody's safe, everybody's fine. But my point is that there is significant opportunity well outside of just the top firms. All right, listen, you guys, and I'm going to repeat this again when I go to wrap up. I want to show you this, and then I want to tell you a story. And I'm going to have to skip some stuff, Sandra, just in the interest of time. You guys are living in a time I can't imagine growing up in. My brain is not designed to process the changes we see on a daily basis, the volume of information that you are confronted with, not just in your education, but in your everyday life, the way we socialize. It's all Some of it's really good, some of it's not, but it's all incredibly complex. And this guy does a pretty good job of it, sort of explaining where we're at on that.
Laws. This is another heuristic. It's a very interesting one that takes its name from Ray Kurzweil, and it's called the law of accelerating returns. And it shows us historically what this has actually looked like. If you feel like I'm overhyping things, if you feel like, oh, well, I always hear that everything is changing, I always hear that change is accelerating, I'm not really sure that's true. Like, I'm living more or less the way that I was a year ago or 2 years ago. Take a look at this. So Ray Kurzweil created this graph about 15 years ago for a book that he was publishing called The Singularity is Near. And what you have here on the y-axis is population in millions. On the x-axis, you have time. And the scatter plot is technological milestones. Now, I recognize this is grossly reductive. There are an awful lot of really important world historical events that are left off, but every one of these not only represented a tremendous technological achievement, but also a technological achievement that truly transformed the way that huge numbers of people lived. It changed lifestyles, it changed economies, it changed the way that people worked, that they congregated, that they understood themselves and each other. And also, as you're moving through time here and you're seeing that we're able to support increasingly large populations, you get a sense of kind of this complex feedback system that we're living within, where new technologies and new innovations allow us to sustain larger populations and more complex social systems. But what I really want you to notice here is that it takes a pretty long time to get from the agricultural revolution to, say, irrigation or the first urban settlement, the first city. It takes a long time to get to writing and mathematics. Those milestones are relatively spread apart. But as you get closer to the present, the distance between those breakthroughs shortens. It compresses dramatically, such that when you reach our era, it starts to look as though things are almost all happening at once. And what this suggests is that the rate of solution architecture itself is indeed increasing exponentially. And that is driving these exponential changes in the economy and society, not just in technology.
So that pace of change and your requirement to keep up with it, combined with your ability, and I've talked about this several times, is what will be different for you guys. It's what will set you apart. But it also creates a complexity that you need to pause and give yourself some grace on, right? Because there's just a lot. You probably might be working and going to school and all this other stuff going on, and it is all at a pace that's just different than it was yesterday, and it's different than it was before that. And I think we have to recognize that. Okay, let's talk about AI. Essentially, AI, been around a long time. It is going to close the gap. So if something is codified, right, like taxes, it can be done by a machine. And so AI at some point will do a lot of work that the profession does, but it is all at that, what I would call that entry level type of work, particularly on an audit, but also on tax returns. And so what's going to have to happen is the student is going to graduate and isn't going to have those 1, 2, 3, 4 years or whatever working in that sort of entry level work. You're going to leap right into more significant value creation and much different work. Not that the jobs aren't there, they're just shifting up the value chain. And so universities are going to have to respond to that. As it happens, you guys are going to have to respond to that, which is why I'm hitting on the skill set stuff pretty hard, because you'll be ready to, I think, make that leap, if you will. This is just some things that the AI is doing, the profession's doing with it, but I wanted to point out, it will lie to you. The next picture I'm going to show you, I gave it some information about myself and said, develop a picture of me speaking to my favorite audience, and that's what it gave us. That is definitely not me. You've already seen this one. I might be talking to my favorite audience, but that is definitely not me. And here's the other way it will lie to you.
Hey, Boyd, how about you let me take over? After all, I am you, but you're not me, or that's how I think this works. There is no doubt that generative AI is the cool new tech kid on the block. But what does that mean for future CPAs and those who educate them? We'll need to explore the answer. but one thing is for sure, change is inevitable. How about you talk about some of these changes we all face?
So did that sound like me a little bit? Yeah, no? You don't think so? No? Yeah? No? All right. Most people think it sounds like me a little bit.
It does. look good.
It's AI, and we trained an AI bot to mimic my voice. It's much better now than when that was recorded. And that stuff's dangerous. When you have this stuff, objective truth is hard to get at. And by the way, we're in an election year, and there's going to be a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of Joe Biden said this, Trump did that, and you have to be very, very careful because it is either all true or all not true for the most part now. So just be very discerning in the media that you consume, particularly if you're considering voting. All right, I'm gonna skip this part in the interest of telling the story and then wrap up with questions. So I'm gonna truncate the story just a little bit. There's a bunch of lead up to this moment in time where I'm looking for my first real job. My wife and I, we've gotten married. We've moved into our first house, and I was working basically a bookkeeping job and while I was going to school. And I've done all this work to be ready to get my resume out in the world and to find a job. All the networking you're supposed to do, all the things. And this is back in the mid-90s, okay? So there wasn't like the internet, and the internet existed, but it wasn't a thing. You literally printed out resumes, folded them, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and mailed it, okay? I mailed, I don't know, 70 resumes probably to a lot of companies where I had developed connections, companies that had open positions, companies that I knew just did recruiting even if they didn't have open positions, all kinds. And I was ready. I hated the job I was in. I felt like I'd spent several years doing all the work I was supposed to do, and I was excited for what was next. And I sent those resumes out, and about 3 weeks go by. Now, mind you, it was the mail, so you had to give time for the mail to get delivered, somebody to process it, put it in a stack, somebody to look at it, somebody to call. It didn't happen like it does today. And after 3 weeks, I didn't get a single phone call, not one, from 70 resumes sent out. And I was starting to feel pretty crappy about myself. And starting to wonder if my wife had made a poor choice in who she married, quite honestly. It was bad. It was not an easy time. And so I took the advice from my dad and my father-in-law that was like, hey, you need to call some of these places, follow up, show some initiative. And so I did. I picked a handful of the jobs that I was most excited about. And one of those was at the Ohio Society of CPAs. Okay, the same as the Georgia Society, but in Ohio. Different organization, but same thing. And called a woman there and left a voicemail at like 5:30 at night saying, hey, I'm Boyd, blah, 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 really interested in the job, da, da, da. If I can provide anything else or tell you anything else about myself or whatever, please let me know. Here's my phone number. And 10 minutes later, the phone rings. In the house, right? I didn't have a cell phone, house phone. I was pick up the house phone, and it is Laura Hay from the Ohio Society of CPAs. And I'm like, oh, thanks for calling me back. She's like, thanks for leaving me a voicemail. And she says, I don't know how to tell you this, but you transposed the last 2 digits of your phone number on your resume. I put the wrong phone number on my resume. Yeah. So I have a question. So for those, I guess, in the room, I have a question. What do you think I did first? What's the first thing I did after getting that news? I'm getting off the phone, obviously. Any guesses? All right. What's that?
You went and changed.
Sorry.
So you went and changed.
I went and changed it. Yep. Update my resume. That was the second thing I did. The first thing I did was called the phone number on my resume. Right? Genius. One smart thing I did. And a woman picked up and I said, hi, my name's Boyd Search. And she goes, oh, we've been taking messages for you. Now, this is in the day, like you couldn't get on the Google and find somebody easily. We had just moved into our house and the phone number was less than a month old. So they couldn't find it in a phone book. Like they didn't know, they couldn't, there was, how do you find me? And so she's like, hey, the first couple were like, you have the wrong number. And then we figured out what was going on. So we started taking messages for you, like this was the right number. We didn't want to mess this up. And she sent me an envelope with like 30 or 35 messages they had taken. Right? I was like, oh my goodness. So I wound up I had several different interviews. I wound up taking the job at the Ohio Society of CPAs. That's where I spent my whole career until I was hired down here by the Georgia Society as the CEO. And so it worked out. But here's the thing. You are going to make mistakes. You're going to screw stuff up. And you have to give yourself some grace. Particularly when we put it in the context of the world that you are having to do this in. We're just physiologically not ready for this pace, right? You guys are ready for it more than anybody, but you have to pause and give yourself some grace. That's number one. Number two, you have to fail with humility and ownership. So I took full ownership of that mistake, both with the person that eventually hired me and other people. And I will tell you this, in your career or at home or in your church or wherever it is you're living your life, you will gain more respect and do more for your own being when you fail and you do it with humility and ownership than you will any success you ever have. Your coworkers will judge you how you respond in your worst time, particularly if it's your fault. And if you own it, they will respect you immensely for it and you'll respect yourself. But give yourself some grace, take ownership of your mistakes, and everything else will work itself out. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna now look and stop sharing and see if anybody has any questions for you. Can everybody hear me okay? Does anybody have questions? If you do, raise your hand.
There's something in the chat. I don't know what.
Michael, did you have a question?
No, ma'am.
So can you go up to the chat up there where the, see the red,
Where is it?
left?
I can't read from here. Sorry.
Oh, gotcha.
Here we go.
There you go.
Okay. Let me go down. Where's the
So we can either start at the bottom or start at the top here. Let's see. Okay. Hello, just out of curiosity, will the reason? Oh, no. Report. Okay, I'm not hearing audio. Uh-oh. Okay, can you hear that? Okay. Can you talk about CPE needed to get licensed, work hours needed? Okay, so on the CPE to get licensed, there's no CPE needed to become licensed. Work hours is essentially 1 year of experience that's signed off by a CPA. I believe it still needs signed off. Maybe it doesn't anymore. I forget actually. I'll have to follow up on that. What happens if you get licensed in one state and move to another? So licensed to Georgia, move to Alabama. So right now, the CPA profession has what we call a pretty strong mobility framework. And by strong, I mean it's better than any of the other licensed professions. You can largely get licensed in one state and then go to almost any other state and practice without having to move your license. Now, reciprocity, where you're getting licensed in Georgia and then moving it to Alabama, is a little different, but largely you can get reciprocity in every state. Hawaii is the only place right now that's really difficult to do that. So moving it from Georgia to Alabama or Alabama to Georgia is, and getting reciprocity to have full licensure there is pretty easy to do. Given the current and expected future demand for the profession, what advice would you provide to someone offered a golden handcuffs position in order to prevent burnout? I guess it would, it all depends on what's in there and what you value. And, you know, some people, I know some young people who, and my nephew is an example, doesn't have a girlfriend. He is not interested in anything but work and moving up the ladder and saving money because he's got this idea that he wants to retire in his 40s. And so he is singular in that mission. And so for him, money as part of a golden handcuffs or something would be incredibly attractive. For others, starting a family and, you know, time away would be the thing to prevent, you know, your burnout, I would think. Not yours, not speaking to you specifically, but so it just depends what's in there. Just sharing my own story, I have a deferred comp account that they put money in, but if I leave, I don't get it. So it incents me to stick around to a certain point in time to get that money. So I think if you're getting one, I think it speaks highly of you. And I think you need to consider what are the things that will make you happy or lend to your ability to deal with all the varied stresses that you have in life, from work to home to community and things like that. With fraud continuing to rise, is it worth getting a CFE prior to getting a CPA? I don't think the order matters. I think either and both are certainly great. I mean, I'm obviously a CPA guy, so I'm going to sell you the CPA before the CFE, but I don't think the order matters. It depends where you're going to work, right? If you're going to work in a firm that isn't really a public accounting firm and just doing forensics work, your attitude towards that's going to be different than if you're working in a public accounting firm or somebody that values that CPA license. So I would encourage both, and order doesn't matter. I do think the CPA is going to be harder to get done than the CFE, so that might factor into your decision making. Are there any unconventional career paths as a CPA that people would not know about? Oh yeah. So you highlight professional expert, witness, that stuff. Those tend to develop out of work doing in the profession, and then you gain expertise, and so you wound up being called on to provide that expertise. But the reality is we have 22,000 licensed CPAs in the state, and less than half of them are working in public accounting, and 25% of them are probably working in tax. And so there are CPAs doing a whole lot of different kind of work. Some of the obvious ones that would stand out are wealth management. We have a lot of CPAs that are doing wealth management, but they're also all over the place. We have a CPA that owns Bulldog Moving. If you've ever seen Bulldog Moving, they essentially took that foundational knowledge of how to be an entrepreneur and how to understand, the language of business in terms of money mattering and cash flow and building a business. And he's been really, really successful at that. So I think there are all kinds of opportunities that expand even outside of what you would consider traditionally in the profession. All right.
Anybody else have any questions? If you do, you can unmute yourself and ask them if you want to just ask the question.
What resources would you recommend for preparing for the CPA exam? So we have some partners the society works with on CPA exam study preparers. But so my own personal, I'm not a CPA. I should actually say that up front. I'm a political science, economics, public policy guy. I did happen to get a degree in accounting, but never intended to be a CPA and just wound up in this world. I have an MBA as well. So I don't have a personal story around sitting for the exam, but I do know those that utilize a CPA exam prep course, or those that are doing it in coordination with the curriculum they're taking, if they can, they fare better just on average. But it can also be pricey. Callie Hammond on our team, her address, the email address was the one I said to send for the free student membership. She would have some advice, I think, or some people to talk to get better advice on that for sure. So don't hesitate to send Callie an email and tell her I told you to.
Anyone else have anything? Anybody here have any questions? Y'all are quite bunch here.
You guys are great. Thank you for putting up with me.
No, we appreciate you coming so much. Absolutely, we do.
Not related to accounting, but you still keep in touch.
Can't read from here, the blue far left. Ryan, did you have a question?
Oh, I was just going to say, I was curious, Boyd, do you keep in touch with?
We don't have, yeah, may not be working though. Let me look here and see if I can find it, if it's working or not. No, I don't know why.
I am on LinkedIn. Boyd Search. Yep. Search just like you're searching. And thank you for being here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks everybody. If you have additional questions, you can also send them to me and I can send them to Boyd too, or you can notify him or however you want. If you think of any after the fact, just don't hesitate to reach out to me, okay?